All right, so welcome back, everybody. It's been a while, but we are back with a guest, another friend of the class. And today we're joined by Ridley Pearson.
Friend for 5 minutes.
He joined us actually February 2020, right before the pandemic hit and before we started doing this format. So I was telling him to much to my delight, I get to do a one-on-one interview with him. I don't know if that's good for him or not.
I want to see the class.
I think most guests would prefer seeing the class rather than look at my face all the time. Uh, but so what we in the class know Ridley as is the author of the Kingdom Keeper series. And so we'll talk about that a little bit.
Right.
There's also a lot of other things that he has done with Disney properties and then outside of Disney properties as well. So just as a way to kind of bring us up to date, Ridley, could you give us kind of recap that brief introduction? I'm sure you remember it from 2 years ago, right? That brief introduction of how you got to where you are with us today in your career and everything.
Sure. Well, I killed people for a living for probably 20 years. I wrote thrillers and murder mysteries for adults. And then I was invited as a guest of Disney along with a guy named Dave Barry into their parks. And I had never been, and we brought our families, and Disney treated us like, in fact, literally the person touring us around had toured John Travolta the week before. So they treated us like rock stars, which we certainly did not deserve. But we had the best 3 days ever. And I was raised to write thank you notes. So I wrote a couple of thank you notes for the people who arranged this because it was amazing. And and then I decided I would call the primary person I thought who had arranged it. And he said, "Oh, no, I actually, it looks like I did it, but Disney Books did this. Call Wendy Lefcon over at Disney Books." One thing led to another, and I was raving about the fact that unlike certain brands of amusement parks, Disney actually, if you're a writer or a creative type, you notice that Disney attractions are built. These $50 million things are built with a beginning, middle, and end. That they tell a story, and it occurred to me that that's probably why we all can go on them so many times and always get something new out of it. Is it isn't there just to make you sick, it's there to tell you a story. And the person I was speaking to, Wendy Lefcon, said, "Well, have you ever thought about writing for us?" And again, one thing led to another, and there's a whole long story of how it ended up the Kingdom Keepers, but it did end up the Kingdom Keepers. And in my writing, I believe in observing and writing and editing. And those three pieces are really important to me. And I tried to explain this to Wendy Lefcon, that in order to do what they were asking me to do, I would have to go inside their parks after dark. Because the stories were going to take place inside the parks after dark, and I'd have to see what that felt like and get on the attractions alone. And she said, "We just don't do that. We don't let people do that." And I said, "Of course you don't, and I get that, but then I'm probably not the right writer for this." And we sort of parted company. And she called me back a month later, and they had made arrangements for me to visit the parks anytime I wanted for free. And they would show me around if I came at 4:30 in the morning. And so I've been in there 30 times now, and including their ships. And I've just had the time of my life, and I get spooked, and things seem creepy. And I have this little, I keep these notebooks around with me, and they've got all my notes in them. And I go home and I write about it. And I try to share, in writing about these 5 kids inside Disney After Dark, I try to share what it's like, even as an adult. And so the books have had a decent success, and they sell 50% to adults and 50% to kids. And younger readers go into the parks with the books and follow what we've written about. And I mean, it's really turned into something just beyond fun. So I've written 10 books in that series, and I have another one coming out in February starting a new 3-book series, by the final 3-book series, called Inheritance, The Shimmer, Kingdom Keeper's Inheritance, The Shimmer. And I'm super excited about that. That's been on the shelves at Disney for 5 years, was delayed because of COVID, and is finally coming out. And in the meantime, my agent had gotten a call from Disney, and they had expressed an interest in me writing a series of short stories involving iconic Disney characters of my choice, but told in a slightly spooky or creepy way. And would I be interested? And I went, yes, I'd be interested. And that became Cautionary Tales.
Mhm.
There's a deeper, I can't remember what exactly you're teaching, but there's a deeper writing story to that book. But if this isn't a writing class, I won't bore them with all that.
Well, this is a fandom class about like,
Oh, okay. So yeah, so I can give you a quickie on this, but I like writing short stories. I've never been a huge fan of reading them. I read Stephen King's short stories because he's a friend and he's just magnificent at it. But I kind of like a deeper, thicker sauce than short stories allow. I do write a lot of my précis and ideas into short stories, but they never see the light of day. And so I sort of explained this to the editor and said, I'm perfectly happy to write 7 or 8 short stories, but what if I did that and I wrote another story that took a young boy named Tim and a young girl named Billy, and Tim and Billy find their way into all the
Mhm.
stories that you would read. So, yes, you could buy the book and open up to chapter 7 and read about Ursula, or you could start at the beginning and follow Billy and Timmy all the way to and through Ursula and beyond into other stories. And she loved the idea. It made it more of a Rubik's Cube. It was harder to write.
Yeah.
But I really liked the challenge, and I was so glad. And we kind of both agreed that if it didn't work, we'd just take it out because the stories would stand alone on themselves. So it was a really complex and challenging book to write, but I really enjoyed it. And then they spent a lot of money on it. It was pitched to me as a special book. They only do 3 or 4 of these a year. And so they put a little more money into production, and they got an amazing illustrator named Abigail Larson, who's won all these awards, and she illustrated every page of the book. It's just gorgeous to look at. So, and they got very creative. And when Timmy and Billy's story show up, they're on black pages with white ink.
Okay.
I mean, it's really neat what they've done. It's a terrific job. So it's almost a coffee table book in a way, but
Yeah.
it's for younger readers, high school readers, adults, whatever. Anyway, it was a total fun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and thanks for that. And I did make a note to write a thank you note to you. So I
Well,
have that down.
for the generation we're speaking to, I mean, I don't know if they even know what a thank you note is, but I was always raised to write
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Whether it was a dinner party, I usually, for a dinner party, I sent a postcard or something. But
Yeah.
um, if I stay at somebody's house for a week or something, I always write a handwritten note. And so, I mean, that's really what led to this whole side of my career,
Yeah.
was writing some thank you notes and then saying, for what they gave us. I mean, they gave us free rooms at the Grand Floridian that for Dave's family and my family. They gave us all our passes. They gave us a VIP guide for the 3 days we were going to be there. They gave us most of our meals at fancy places at the top of the Contemporary and, inside the Grand. I mean, they treated us like rock stars.
Yeah.
And if anything deserves a thank you note, that did. I don't know what they would have spent on that, but it was extravagant, and we were so grateful. So I wrote this thank you note, and then I actually self-corrected myself and just said, a note is not going to do it. I need
Yeah.
to call
Yeah.
these people.
Yeah.
And look I mean, it turned out giving me a second career. So
Yeah. Well, and that it brings up a good question. In total, with like for young adult and Disney for adults outside of Disney, and over your career, how many books would you estimate that you have written?
it's a little over 60
Okay.
that are
All right.
published. I've
Yeah.
written more. Of course, they didn't get accepted, but I've published about 60 books since 1985.
Okay. And so get onto the Kingdom Keepers. This is a story we've talked about it in class. I've talked about it with various people. People who listen to this who are not in the class know about it as well, and a lot of people have read them. Obviously, it's a story of five main kids, and then really there's two other kids that are added in. So it's kind of this group of seven who work their way
Yeah.
through. And what's so cool about it is like the discussion of the technology, and like the front story and the backstory of why they really are made into holograms and everything.
Mm,
But what I found myself really enjoying, because I listened to these as an adult, I didn't read them
sure.
as they came out.
Yeah, sure.
So I listened to them. I was lucky enough where I could listen to book one and I liked that. So I got book two and then book
Yeah.
three, and I just kept
Instead of
going
waiting a
through.
year. Yeah.
Yeah, so I never had to
Right.
wait for anything. So now, like when I listen to Cautionary Tales, I'm like, oh, is there something else beyond this? And if so, like, how long is it going to be? And like with the updates to Kingdom Keepers, like I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for them. So it's a different experience for me. But one of the things that I really liked about Kingdom Keepers is that they all start in about seventh or eighth grade, right? And then by the time they're finished, the books are finished, they are in college. And if and reading the synopsis of Inheritance, it seems like that at least some of them are continuing into the next book. So you
Oh,
really
absolutely.
do you really do follow these characters as they're growing up.
Right. And they're in early middle age now in
Okay.
Inheritance. And really the books focus on their kids.
Okay. So
But
how
I was told that so much of the popularity of the books were the fun relationships
yeah.
between the Kingdom Keepers that I thought, well, then eventually they should marry, you
Yeah.
know. So
Yeah.
several of them marry and have kids, and then the kids have, because some of the wives have these extraordinary qualities, from what I called the Fairleys. These kids are pretty special, and they're very good at finding their way into trouble,
Okay. As kids are. Well,
as
as
kids are.
people are in general, I should say. So how is it, like, from a writing perspective, how do you first how rewarding is it to follow character stories over 10 books, over however many years? And then also, how do you do that? How do you keep up
Yeah.
with all the storylines and the relationships and everything?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's incredibly rewarding, but it's actually very difficult. And I make mistakes at it all the time. And the readers are the first people to jump out and tell me that. I'm still looking for an editor who can catch these mistakes before they go to press. Um, because they're written over 20 some years. So it's hard for me to remember exactly what emotion was where. But the first big mistake I made with Kingdom Keepers that I think turned out to be a good mistake was that usually, like in my crime novels, I have maybe a group of four or five, but it's really about one or maybe two people. And for whatever reason, right from the beginning of the Kingdom Keepers, I saw it as a group of five friends. And then I got into writing it, and I went, oh my gosh, how do I keep all these people on stage and relevant when there's so much going on? You have to keep them individual. You have to make sure you haven't left them out of chapters for 20 chapters because, what happened to Willa? Where's Willa?
Hmm.
So in terms of writing it, it's very hard, and they're very challenging books to write. And you mentioned Amanda and Jess, and they were supposed to, in my outline, Amanda and Jess were in the book for 2 pages.
Okay.
And I started to write them, and they became so interesting to me. They're these kids who were grabbed up by the government because they had paranormal powers. Um, and of course, none of us understand paranormal powers if they even exist. And so the government was into studying them, but not in a bad way, not in a Hunger Games kind of way, just sort of keeping them in a school in Maryland and watching them and trying to figure out all this stuff. And that got a little claustrophobic, and two of them got out and found their way down to Florida, and they end up connecting with the Kingdom Keepers. And all of a sudden I said, why would they only be in here for two
Yeah.
pages? And I got a crush on the one named Amanda. I just, for whatever reason, every time I went to write her, I wrote about 6 pages. My
Hmm.
editor would say, we're taking 5 of these pages out because that's just too much. And I'd go, okay, okay, okay. Um, so, you never know when you're writing what's going to happen. And I just ended up, as a writer, I ended up having 5 balls in the air, 7 balls in the air, and it's really tricky.
Hmm.
And now I have those 7 and their kids. So these inheritance books are a huge challenge, but really fun.
Yeah.
It's really fun to see their kids for me, and to see characters that I've known since 6th and 7th grade, and they're now in their early 30s, and they've got 8-year-olds, and it's just super fun.
So I'm picturing like you have this wall that is just like it's almost like in the detective movies where you have
Yeah,
sticky
that's
notes and
how I write.
everything. Okay.
That's exactly how I write. Yep. I
It
write by I'm in a different spot right now, but I write by cards up on the wall, and I outline all my books, and that's about 60 cards usually,
okay.
anywhere between 50 and 80 cards. And then I go back on the cards and I make sure that I understand how that action scene will advance a character. And I make notes on the same card that, this is where Finn starts in fear and ends up confident, so that I can get character arcs for everybody. Very, very hard to do, and I probably don't do a very good job of it, but I try. And then, you get into something like the inheritance books, and those cards get a lot bigger
Yeah.
because there's a lot going on. But inheritance came out of, I was sort of done, and Disney said, "Would you like to do any more?" And I said, I think the Kingdom Keepers have gotten to be young adults, and that's enough.
Hmm.
That's not going to be a middle grade book. So, I'm not exactly sure what I would do. And they said, "Well, think about it if you want." And I came across, which you've probably seen. I can't remember where it is. You may know. I actually think it's in one of the Disney theaters in Orlando, maybe the American Pavilion in Epcot or something, but there is a model of Epcot.
Hmm.
And Walt Disney envisioned this acronym, uh, attraction to someday have a city around it of
Hmm.
about 40,000 people. And I owe so much to Disney for the fun I've had that I thought, I'm going to do an homage to Walt Disney and put that city around Epcot.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, it isn't even set now, because now it's not there.
Yeah.
So I have to set this thing 15, 20 years in the future. And then I went, oh, in that case, it's their kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it all kind of came in from a different place.
Yeah.
Again, observe, write, edit. And I observed something that kicked off an idea. And that's the same thing with Kingdom Keepers. I was I was asked to do this, but then the rules around writing a series set in their parks turned out and they wanted it to be suspense.
Yeah.
And they said nothing bad can happen. You can't sabotage a ride or bring a weapon into the park or kidnap a kid or hurt a kid, but we want it to be suspenseful. And I went, and I observed this. Do I have it here? You can get these things on the internet. They're about the size of a salad bowl, and they have a little lid on them. But when you set it all up, a little plastic pig sits on top.
Yeah.
It's a hologram. It's not a real pig. And I saw one of these things, and I went to pick up the pig, and I went, "Oh my gosh, it's not real." In movies, we make holograms kind of ghosty,
Yeah.
and all, and they're, the best movie that worked with holograms was that, the second Harrison Ford in the future movie, Blade Runner,
Yeah.
the second
Yeah.
Blade Runner with Gosling in it. and I think it was Gosling, and he has an assistant, and of course she just looks perfectly normal, and then you're 20 minutes into the movie and you realize she's a hologram,
Yeah.
and that's what holograms really look like. I mean, they completely convince you. It's not like they look ghosty or anything. So I went to pick up this pig, and I went, well, my gosh, if the kids are holograms, then anything can happen to them, because nothing will happen to them
Yeah.
if they're just a light projection. I ran it by the Disney attorneys, and they said, that's the solution, go. And
Yeah.
so that's why they ended up holograms.
I mean, that's a fantastic like behind the scenes story of it. I love that. And I remember the last time we spoke, you talking about how kids would write you and ask how their favorite characters were
Oh, it's
doing.
still
And
good.
so
Yeah.
actually now when you go, it's been this way a long time, but when you go to ridleypearson.com, you actually, there's a quiz on there to see what kingdom keeper you are. There's illustrations of like a backstory. So like a page for each of the characters. And so a question I have is, just from, I guess, a 30,000 foot view, how
Right.
does it feel to write young adult novels? Which, by the way, another great thing about it is they increasingly got longer and longer. So you could tell, well, you could tell like kind of as if somebody's reading the first one when they're 10 or 11, then by the
Right.
time that they are growing up and they're 17 and 18, where the first one may be 200 or 300 pages, then they're more able to read a longer book and keep their attention span later. So I really appreciated seeing all of that as well. And again, that's because I was able to listen to them like
Yeah.
consecutively.
Yeah.
But how does it feel to write something for young adults, but is so enjoyed by young adults and adults the same?
Yeah, that was a surprise, honestly. That I just didn't know enough about Disney to know how many millions of adults are interested really in anything Disney.
Hmm.
And I guess less surprising once I thought about it was that those same adults would love to know what it looks like backstage.
Hmm.
Um, and so I found some of that I've had to take out in these rewrites just because of Disney's decisions and things. But um, I found that the more research I did and the more I was allowed to show this and that, and I'm not allowed to show too much, but the more interested the adults were,
Yeah.
um, and that they were often my biggest fans at
Hmm.
signings and things. It's sort of a mix between. Right now, it's the most fun I've ever had at these signings because the people who started as young readers are now out of college.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So at my signings, I get people in their late 20s, early 30s who are just huge fans of the books, not of me, but of the books. And as well as current readers who are really excited about it, as well as zillions of adults nearly my age, who just picked them up from the park or somewhere and fell in love with reading about the technologies that are used and all of that, and the Disney lore, and have stayed with the series. So it's like a big family now. It's really
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
Many generations.
Yeah, that's
But
amazing. That's
unexpected,
awesome.
not planned, and
Yeah.
certainly not. You never write a book for something. Like I don't really write these for younger readers. I just try to write a compelling, exciting story about younger kids. Um, and I'm about 12 in my heart anyway, so that isn't very hard. And and you hope that you make them exciting for anyone, but you use language and you don't involve them in adult situations so that really anybody can read it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, the last question I have before we get into our rapid questions, is again that kind of 30,000 foot view, or philosophical question. As a fantasy writer,
Mm.
what do you think? What is the place for fantasy in individuals' lives and then also in our greater society?
Yeah, That's a big question. I think that I think you could substitute almost at will the word, instead of the word fantasy, you could use the word imaginative.
Okay. Yeah.
Fantasy is often used, and fantasy can have some, um, you know, sort of sordid um, associations and
Hmm.
meanings,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and yet it's a widespread thing. But I really think that science fiction is imaginative,
Hmm.
um, and any world building story is imaginative. And we are the interesting thing when you study drama. I teach now at a university, at Boise State University. When you study drama, that all came out of the Greeks. They wrote a certain way that Carl Jung picked up on and
Hmm.
realized that the reason we are so comfortable with the format of Greek drama is that we dream in 3 acts. We dream a beginning, middle, and end to every story we dream, which is our imagination. So if you write a story that is an imaginative story and it somewhat follows the format, not the formula. There is no such thing as a formula, but the format and form of a 3 act structure, which is what every film has done in that's ever been made, um, and intentionally done. Then you tap into that part of us that we spend 8 to 10 hours a day in, which is
Hmm.
a dream state. Um, we know our dogs and cats do it because they sit there when they're asleep and they're running,
Hmm.
they're barking, they're chasing the squirrel in their dreams. It's just something amazing about animals. We're given the gift of imagination, whether we think we have it or not. We all dream, so
Yeah.
we have it. And all you're really doing is saying, look, you can do this in the daytime too.
Hmm.
You can open a book and you will be carried away to a place that is imaginative instead of absolutely solidly real.
Yeah.
And if that appeals to you, there's a treasure trove of thousands and thousands of books in many different languages, all of which satisfy that urge to be in a dream state.
Yeah. I really, I feel like I was just sitting in your class, and
I'm
just kind
sorry.
of, no, just kind of get, no, not at all. Kind of, probably should choose better wording
You're over
maybe.
there
I,
going,
no, that I just got lost in what you were talking about. I actually, since teaching this class, I've started writing more about imagination in my
yeah,
academic writing and everything. And so it is that's a fascinating, that's a fascinating response from what I consider at least a true expert in this area. So thank you for that. This
yeah.
and at
And
some
that
point,
we both are in awe of the greatest Imagineer of all, which is Walt Disney. I
mhm,
mean, anybody who would go bankrupt 3 times or risk it in order to get these imaginary parks up. I mean, the guy was just, I won't even say he's ahead of his time because he was just at the exact right time.
mhm,
And look at what we have for it. I
yeah,
mean, my gosh,
yeah.
unbelievable that
I
company does.
think if we all could use our imagination a little bit
Yeah.
more, and
Yes.
feel free to use our imagination,
Yeah.
then I think we're in a better place individually. I think we're in a better place as a group, or
Yeah.
at
Oh, yeah. It helps
also.
humankind. My brother is visiting, and he was reminiscing about our oldest daughter when she was about 7. She's 25 now, but he asked her if she wanted to go on a walk with him one day. And we live out here in Idaho in the countryside, and she said absolutely. And he meant a walk. I mean, he
Yeah.
wanted to get some exercise. And so she makes it about 5 steps out and stops and studies this flower and starts talking about a butterfly. And she was world building. And he said it was sort of the shortest walk I've ever took, but it was long. But that childlike
Yeah.
imagination. It doesn't hurt any of us
Yeah.
to tap into that. It's calming. It's interesting, and I think it's where so much of the future comes from.
Yeah.
Is just considering what might be.
Yeah. I mean, that's the reason two of my favorite attractions are Journey into Imagination and the
Mm.
Carousel of Progress. They both have pretty strong messages of that. So we have about 4 minutes, and I'll ask my rapid questions. So these, as
Right.
I told you, these are you respond, you explain if you want. You don't have to give any explanation if you don't want.
Okay. You got
And
it.
since you've written about this, then we'll kind of focus it more toward that. So, what do you have a favorite park that you have written about? A park or any of the cruise ships, or is there a favorite
Well, they're all
content?
favorites. I think you can't get past Disneyland and Magic Kingdom for their iconic relationship to the birth of all great things in Disney. And then personally, I fell in love with Animal Kingdom, and subsequently, I fell in love with Epcot on the East Coast. Um, and Epcot has fascinated me, so
Hmm.
I think that's why Inheritance takes place in Epcot. It's
Okay.
really an interesting thing because it has a world showcase, which is a cultural dynamic, and it has a lot of terrific, what they call attractions, rides
Yeah.
in the lower half. Very interesting way to do something.
Yeah. Um, is there an attraction or a few attractions a favorite attraction or attractions that you have written about in these stories?
Well, an iconic attraction for the Kingdom Keeper series is It's a Small World.
Yeah.
And that came from my own research. I may have spoken about this before, so
Hmm.
I'll just do it quickly. But at 5 in the morning, I walked it with some of the people who knew all about it. Then they turned it on and I wrote it. And I wrote it with my guide. And two of the dolls that were turned off moved, stepped
Hmm.
forward, and I freaked out. So that's always remained one of my, I actually still, there are times I don't write it anymore because I'm just spooked by it.
Yeah.
But um, there's so many I love, but the Haunted Mansion, epic, iconic, unbelievable. I happen to love Splash Mountain, Thunder Mountain, both of those.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's so many, but I think Small World and the Haunted Mansion are just, and then there are the new rides. Have
Yeah.
you been on any of these? Like, have you been on that Star Wars ride?
Yes. Yeah.
Holy
It is
smokes. I
amazing.
mean, that's the new way to tell a
Yeah.
story. I was in there saying, I want to write one of
Yeah.
these. My gosh, is it immersive?
I know.
I just could not believe that thing.
I mean that in you're in Galaxy's Edge, which is immersive already, and
Oh,
then
already. Yeah.
you get on that attraction, and it is absolutely
They just gave it
amazing from
everything they
beginning
had,
to end.
you know?
Yeah, it's
The wait line is amazing. I thought I was in the ride when I was on another part of the
yeah,
wait line. Then I thought I was in the ride when I entered this gigantic room. Then I got on the ride.
yeah,
And I said, these guys have killed this. This
yeah.
is amazing.
Our oldest son, I have two sons, and our oldest, actually, when we were being interrogated, he was the one who they singled out to interrogate, to ask
Great.
like what we were doing. And so the rest of the day he kept saying like, Dad, why did they ask me? And I was like, well, because you did a good job not telling what we were really there for and everything. And I the fourth or fifth time he asked, I kind of thought like, is he asking because he wants to know the answer, or is he asking because he wants us to remember that he was asked and not
Right.
his younger sibling was asked, or yeah, like he was asked, not me. So
Yeah.
um is there well, and you just said you want to write one of the an attraction like that.
Well, I never will, but
Is
how cool would that job be? I mean, to be an Imagineer. Wow.
Yeah, is there a attraction or a park that you haven't been able to write about yet that you really want to be able to include in a story?
Yes, I mean, I've written about it. I probably shouldn't have, but I do a lot of research. But I really need to get to and want to get to both Shanghai
Hmm.
and Japan. Those are the two I haven't been to. I write about them because they're important to the inheritance story. And I do, I watch a million YouTube videos and I talk to the Imagineers and I talk to the archives and do all that before I do any of this. And it's all policed by everybody so that I get my story right. But I'm very excited to see both Shanghai and the one south of Tokyo.
Okay. All right.
Disney seas.
And then the last one is kind of lumped together. Outside of Peter and the Starcatcher, which we didn't really talk about, outside of Cautionary Tales and Kingdom Keepers, is there what subject matter would you most like to write about? And without giving too much away, do you have plans of doing something in the future with either things with the company or in themed entertainment and things like that?
That's interesting. We were talking about it earlier before we came on the air, but I had really been interested in writing about SEA, the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, but they found somebody else to do that, so I didn't get to do that. I put a line in a book because this is set in the future. It's in the second inheritance that I'm writing right now. And I wrote this line and I thought, ooh, I wonder if they'd ever let me do that. But I don't know if I should even mention it. But anyway, there was a backstory of a character that just popped out of my head.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, would that make a fun story or even a movie? And they're probably working on it, knowing them, because they work on everything.
Yeah.
But yes, there are plenty of ideas, and I'm writing another thriller. I'm starting another thriller. I'm not very far into it, but and it involves some autobiographical family work that I've always wanted to write but couldn't find. I didn't want to write anything autobiographical. So I always thought that's the only place for it. And then one day I went, ooh, I could put this in one of my thrillers. So I'm working on seeing if I can. I had a really unusual childhood in some ways, and I want to include some of that as somebody's past. So that's something fun to do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and now obviously when Inheritance comes out, I'll enjoy that one. And now when the second book comes out, I am going to look for the line.
You'll see the line.
I'm going to look for the line, and I'm going to reach out and see if I'm close to, and I'm sure I'm not even in the same ballpark, but see if I can.
Oh, you'll know right where it is now that
Okay.
we've talked about it. Yeah.
Okay.
You will know,
Well, now it's a challenge, so I feel like
it's literally in that language. That's the language that's used. So
okay.
Then we can talk about that.
Well, Ridley, thank you so much again for doing this.
Yeah.
Like I said, I have been looking for a reason for you to come back.
You're so kind.
I didn't want to just use up all your time and just, ask about random things. I wanted to have something new to talk about.
Anytime.
So
Anytime.
this is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for doing this.
Best to you always.
What's the best place for people to keep up with your work?
The website, ridleypearson.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram. And there is a giant, I'm not on TikTok, but a dear friend informed me that the hashtag Kingdom Keepers has 1.4 million viewers
Really?
on TikTok.
Okay.
And I went, what? I'm not even on TikTok. But they all share cosplays and stuff, and it just looks amazing to me. So we're also on TikTok, but I didn't really know we were on TikTok. Yeah. But yeah, I'm going to be on a book tour for Inheritance in February. That'll be on our website. Maybe it'll be on some Instagram. So any of those, but it's always Ridley Pearson.
Okay.
Yep. Usually
perfect. Well, thank you so much, Ridley, for doing this,
thank you.
Have a great rest of your day.
You as well.
Bye.